Welcome back to our deep dive. The recent attack in Pahalgam,
hmm
it really throws a harsh light on the whole India-Pakistan dynamic again.
It certainly does, and it forces us to look closely at Pakistan's strategy or perhaps the assumptions behind it.
Exactly. And for a long time, a big piece of that puzzle has been their reliance on China, hasn't it?
Absolutely. That alliance has been central to their thinking for decades.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Our main source today is a pretty sharp analysis from Channel 18, and it really digs into these core assumptions Pakistan seems to be operating under. Especially this idea that China will always back them up.
Right. And understanding this is, well, it's crucial for anyone following international relations in this region, India, China, Russia.
And especially, I think, for our listeners preparing for the UPSC exams, these dynamics are core syllabus stuff, really.
Precisely. So the goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is to properly examine Pakistan's strategic thinking after Pahalgam, using that Channel 18 analysis, and test how valid some of those core beliefs actually are.
Okay, let's kick off with a big one. This reliance on China. Channel 18 mentions the usual pillars, right? CPEC, shared antagonism towards India, defense cooperation.
All true. That's the historical context. But the analysis asks the tough question, does all that automatically mean China jumps into a hot war alongside Pakistan?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Particularly for UPSC aspirants trying to gauge realpolitik.
And Channel 18's analysis suggests banking on that might be, well, a very faulty premise, a dangerous miscalculation even.
Why is that? What's the core argument?
It really boils down to economic realpolitik. Look at the numbers. India-China bilateral trade was over, what, $136 billion last year?
Wow, that's significant.
It's huge. So why would Beijing risk disrupting that massive economic relationship, those vital trade routes, for a conflict sparked by Pakistan? It just doesn't seem to add up from China's perspective. Their focus seems much more on economic supremacy.
So the all-weather friendship might have some very practical limits based on dollars and cents?
That's what the analysis strongly implies. It's likely more transactional than ideological, especially now.
And Channel 18 also touches on China's own internal priorities shifting, particularly post-COVID.
Yes, exactly. The analysis argues China's focus has pivoted more towards internal stability, economic revival, maybe projecting power through soft power and economic means rather than direct military adventurism.
So getting involved in a potentially messy conflict on Pakistan's behalf.
Is probably seen as a major strategic risk, a distraction, maybe even an own goal, as the analysis puts it. It just doesn't align with their current objectives.
So if not jumping in militarily, what's the more likely Chinese reaction, according to Channel 18?
The analysis suggests a more probable scenario is China stepping in as a mediator, trying to de-escalate things to protect our own investments. They have stakes in both countries, remember, with CPEC in Pakistan and that huge trade with India.
Right. Playing the peacemaker allows them to protect their interests without picking a losing side or getting bogged down. Makes sense.
It aligns much better with their current strategic posture.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What about Russia? Channel 18 brings them into the picture as a sort of unexpected kingmaker.
Yeah, it's a fascinating angle. Russia's relationship with India is historically very strong, much stronger and deeper than its ties with Pakistan, which are more peripheral in Moscow's strategic view.
The analysis mentions an India-Russia defense umbrella. Can you elaborate a bit on that? What does that actually mean on the ground?
Well, it refers to the long history of Russia being a key defense supplier to India. We're talking about major systems like the S-400 air defense.
With a sophisticated kit.
Extremely. And joint projects like the BrahMos cruise missile, naval cooperation. It's a time-tested relationship built over decades. Not just a simple arms deal. There's a level of mutual respect there.
And Pakistan's relationship with Russia just isn't on that same level.
Not really, no. It's much less central to Russian strategy. India is the major long-term partner in South Asia for Moscow.
And according to Channel 18, the current situation with Western sanctions on Russia actually strengthens India's position in this.
That's a key point in the analysis. The sanctions have made Russia more reliant on partners like India. Think about oil exports, finding alternatives to the dollar like the rupee-ruble trade mechanism, technology partnerships.
So Russia has a vested economic interest in keeping things stable, especially where its key partner, India, is concerned.
Precisely. It gives Moscow a strong incentive to, let's say, discourage instability that could harm India, its reliable customer and partner.
So how might Russia actually influence things in a China-Pakistan context during a conflict? Channel 18 suggests it could be quite subtle.
Yeah, the analysis points to Russia's logistical influence, its sort of de facto control over transport routes through Central Asia.
Oh, okay. So if China wanted to send major military supplies overland to Pakistan.
Russia could, theoretically, create friction, delays, logistical hurdles. Nothing overt, perhaps, but enough to hinder a smooth flow of support. It's a way to potentially lean towards India without directly confronting China.
Interesting. A kind of quiet leverage. Now, going back to the Pahalgam attack itself, Channel 18 calls the timing an ill-timed blunder. What's the thinking there? This is important context for UPSC folks tracking regional stability.
Well, it seems ill-timed because Pakistan is facing, frankly, a multitude of crises internally. Firstly, the economy is in dire straits.
You hear about the inflation, the IMF bailouts.
Exactly. Inflation reportedly over 40%, the rupee tanking, tough IMF conditions. This severely impacts military readiness. Channel 18 mentions things like fuel rationing for the military, spare parts shortages, even electricity cuts at border outposts.
Not exactly a recipe for launching or sustaining a major military operation.
It seems incredibly risky from a purely logistical standpoint. Starting a fight when you can barely keep the lights on, metaphorically speaking.
And it's not just the economy, right? The analysis also points to internal security problems.
Yes, major ones. There's the resurgence of the TTP, the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan. There's the ongoing insurgency in Balochistan, unrest in Gilgit-Baltistan. A country's looking quite fragile internally.
So the suggestion is Pahalgam might have been an attempt to distract from all that internal chaos.
That's one interpretation the analysis explores, a sort of gamble to rally nationalist sentiment, perhaps. But it's a gamble that could easily backfire and worsen the internal instability.
Okay, let's widen the lens again to the global picture. Channel 18 emphasizes India's rising stature internationally.
Definitely. India's position has shifted significantly. You see it in partnerships like the Quway, a generally more favorable view from the West, its growing role in the Indo-Pacific narrative. It's just not the same diplomatic landscape as, say, 20 years ago.
And how does that contrast with Pakistan's standing, especially after something like Pahalgam, according to the analysis?
Well, the analysis suggests there's a growing global weariness, perhaps with states seen as enabling or tolerating extremist groups. Even with the FATF delisting, attacks like Pahalgam damage credibility.
So the label of terror apologist, even if contested, still sticks and causes problems.
It certainly complicates their international relations. Meanwhile, India has invested heavily in multilateral diplomacy. Its narrative on cross-border terrorism often finds a receptive audience. Its voice carries more weight now.
Channel 18 also mentions shifts in the Arab world. That region used to be seen as solidly pro-Pakistan.
That's another key shift highlighted. Major players like Saudi Arabia and the UAE seem to be increasingly prioritizing strategic and economic ties with India. Think energy security, defense tech cooperation.
And the OIC's response on Kashmir hasn't been as strong as Pakistan might have hoped.
The analysis points to a more muted response, suggesting that the traditional automatic support isn't quite there anymore. Priorities seem to be shifting towards economic interests and regional stability, where India is a major factor.
Okay, let's talk about the hard realities of conflict logistics and supply chains. Channel 18 raises concerns about China's ability to actually supply Pakistan effectively in a war.
Right. If China decided to actively support Pakistan militarily, getting supplies there could be a real challenge. The Indian Navy's growing strength in the Indian Ocean is a major factor.
You mean controlling the sea lanes?
Exactly. India has significant capability, especially around choke points like the Strait of Malacca or the Gulf of Aden, to potentially disrupt maritime trade routes. That includes routes to Gwadar port, a key CPEC outlet.
And India's own naval assets, like the new aircraft carrier.
INS Vikrant, yes, plus an expanding submarine fleet. It gives India a credible sea denial capability, making large-scale seaborne supply to Pakistan risky for China.
The analysis also brings up India's actions on the LAC with China, like during the Galwan clash. How is that relevant here?
It's used as an example of India demonstrating it can conduct limited, localized military operations to counter provocations without necessarily escalating into full-scale war with China.
So the implication is India might adopt a similar strategy against Pakistan. Decisive strikes, but contained.
That's the suggestion. A doctrine focused on limited war aims, achieving specific objectives quickly, perhaps making a wider intervention by China less likely or necessary. Holding the line, essentially.
So pulling this together, the analysis seems quite critical of what it calls the Munir doctrine. the apparent strategy behind Pakistan's current posture.
Yes. Channel 18 portrays it as based on flawed assumptions. The assumption that India would hesitate to hit back hard, the assumption of automatic, unwavering Chinese support, the assumption that the West would just issue condemnations and do nothing more.
And the analysis suggests the reality could be very different.
Markedly different, yes. Swift Indian retaliation seems likely, given recent precedents. China, as we discussed, would probably be cautious, prioritizing its own interests, and there might be considerable global sympathy, maybe even support for India.
So the likely outcome of escalation, according to this analysis, what does provocation without strategy lead to for Pakistan?
The picture painted is one of potential isolation. Swift military setbacks from India using its advanced capabilities, Rafales, Pinaka rockets, BrahMos, better ISR.
While China offers vague statements.
Probably. And maybe Russia quietly hinders Chinese aid. The West likely sides with India, or at least supports its right to self-defense. And the Middle East remains largely quiet, focused on its India ties.
It sounds like a scenario where Pakistan finds itself fighting alone, with fewer resources than expected, and facing severe economic and diplomatic consequences.
That's the stark conclusion of the analysis, yes. A war fought on false hope of external backing.
And Channel 18 finishes by mentioning Operation Sindoor, the reported strike on a terror camp inside Pakistan.
Yes, the reference to destroying a camp where Kasab, Headley trained, seems intended to underscore India's resolve and capability to act decisively against perceived threats, even across the border. It reinforces the idea that Indian responses might be quicker and more forceful than assumed in Islamabad.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize the key takeaway here for you, our listener, especially if you're tracking this for UPSC or just general awareness. Channel 18's analysis really hammers home that Pakistan's strategic assumptions, particularly about getting unconditional Chinese support in a war, they look deeply flawed in today's world.
Absolutely. China's economic focus, Russia's relationship with India, Pakistan's own internal weaknesses, India's growing global clout. All these factors point to a very different strategic reality than may be perceived by some in Pakistan.
Which leads us to the final thought for you to ponder. Based on this analysis from Channel 18, what does this mean for the long term, for regional stability, for the future of India-Pakistan relations? And crucially, how should India navigate these dynamics strategically? There are no easy answers, that's for sure.
It's incredibly complex. Understanding these intertwined relationships and motivations is vital.
Indeed. And grasping these global power plays, the economic undercurrents, the shifting alliances, it's essential, whether you're preparing for UPSC mains or just want to be an informed citizen.
It requires looking beyond the headlines, definitely.
So if you found this deep dive into Channel 18's analysis useful, please do give us a like, subscribe for more content like this, and perhaps drop a comment with your thoughts or any further questions you might have. We'd love to hear from you. And just to reiterate, our discussion today was based on that specific analysis from Channel 18 concerning the Pahalgam incident and its wider geopolitical implications.